Hello and welcome to Q Focus. I'm Mark, and joining me today inside Parliament House is Andrew Olexander, Independent MP, with the Civil Unions Bill, which is currently underway. Andrew, thanks for coming on and chatting to us.
It's a really great pleasure, Mark, to be here, and welcome to the Victorian Parliament.
Can you firstly explain to us what the bill actually will do?
Sure. A civil union is a union between any two people who are adults entered into willingly of any gender. And it accords them rights which are virtually the same under Victorian law as married couples have. Now, the Marriage Act is federal legislation. In Victoria, we don't have the ability to change federal legislation to make it possible for people to enter a civil union regardless of gender. Marriage is very specific in the Act. It has to be a male and a female, and the federal government aren't about to change that. But a civil union gives people who are interested in entering into a union, regardless of their gender, male, female, transgender or intersex, the right to enter into a union which gives them the same rights as a married couple would have. And in that respect, it's non-discriminatory. Opposite sex couples can have a civil union. Same-sex couples can have a civil union. People who are intersex or transgender are not excluded from having a civil union. It's a totally non-discriminatory way that the law in Victoria can recognise a relationship as legitimate, as real, and it's a way that the legal system in the state can promote equality between married couples and people who are not, under the Federal Act, entitled to get married.
So what prompted you to draft such a bill anyway? What's the reasoning behind it?
What prompted me was a desire to place GLBTI people on equal footing. Not special rights, but equal rights with people of an opposite sex who are married and have all of the recognition and rights and obligations which accrue to those people.
And why shouldn't we?
And that's my motivation, Mark. Why shouldn't we? We are contributing citizens of this country. We fight in its wars. We are doctors, we are lawyers, we are tram conductors, we are shop assistants. We are in every walk of life, and we play our part. We're in the sports sector, the arts sector, every sector, and we care about this country, and we pay our taxes, and we work hard. And yes, sometimes we fall in love. And when we fall in love, the law currently says to us, well, you're different from everybody else because of the law. We will not, and society will not, at large, recognise your relationship as legitimate. I have always believed that is fundamentally wrong as an openly gay man, but I think as a human being, I have always believed that that's fundamentally wrong, and that is what prompted me to move this, prepare and move this piece of legislation.
Okay, and so how do you think the bill will go when it's brought into...
The government at the moment has a massive majority, the Labor Party have a massive majority in both Houses of Parliament. For this bill to proceed, the Bracks government have to allow it to be debated and would have to give their members the ability to vote for it, either on a conscience vote or a party vote.
But that's not likely if the Bracks government is saying it's not on the agenda.
To date, the Bracks government have said that it's not on their legislative agenda. What they haven't had is a bill to this point. Now there is a bill that has been prepared and they can see exactly what its effects are. I know that there are a huge number of people within the ALP caucus, within the state parliament, who dearly want to vote in favour of this legislation. And they would need to debate that in their caucus to determine whether or not it gets placed on the agenda or whether it's knocked back and knocked down.
So if it does get placed on the agenda, is that the only way that a vote could be?
In our parliamentary system, the majority of the numbers in each house control the agenda. So if the majority, who are the government, decide that they do not want it to be debated, or that if it is debated they want to oppose it, it would not get through. They can either stop it from being debated or stop it from getting through. What I will be saying to them, to all of the parties, Labor, Liberal and National, is that this is a fundamental piece of human rights legislation. It is long overdue. Promises were made 7 years ago by the Bracks government to do something about civil unions, and nothing has happened to date. This is a focal point now for that to happen, and it will be a test for the government whether or not they decide to knock it back or whether or not they decide to allow it to proceed. And you can promise everything in the world. Politicians make promises all the time, and you know what? It doesn't really matter what colour the politician is. The promise often doesn't happen once they've achieved power. What this is doing is putting them on the spot and saying, look, here is an excellent piece of legislation. It solves a huge problem. The majority of the community support it. All of the opinion polls show that civil unions are supported by a large majority of our community.
If the majority of everybody else are saying that, yeah, they support it, shouldn't that sway politicians to think, well, yeah, if they come out in support of it, well, that it's going to be good for them to get the vote? Yeah,
good point. The government are well aware of the large majority of Victorians who do support this proposal. They're very well aware of it. But the government have got an electoral issue to look at. And the electoral issue is that they do not want to antagonise Family First, who are the formal presence of our opponents in the political process. Family First are a party which is based on Christian churches and backed by some very fundamentalist and extreme Christian churches who oppose this sort of measure and homosexuality generally, vehemently. They don't want to antagonise that lobby, and they don't want to rock the boat, so to speak, before an election. Now, that's an electoral consideration which has meant that they have put a human rights issue on the back burner. They've really done everything that they can to try to stop this from proceeding, and they haven't been successful. We now have a bill, and they will now have to make a decision on what they do about the bill. All of the parties are in that situation. It's interesting that a piece of legislation like this gets back on the radar screen as a result of an independent rather than as a result of one of the major parties in the state.
And will that make it harder for something to happen with the bill because it's an independent rather than being backed by a party?
Yeah, look, you can go two ways on this. I think that the government need to allow a conscience vote to happen on this bill. They need to allow it to be debated, and they need to allow a conscience vote. My information from the Liberal Party and the Labor Party is that a vast majority would be achieved in both houses in favour of this legislation, and it would pass if a conscience vote were allowed. I'm saying that I'm hearing that about 40% of the Liberal members, if they were allowed, a conscience vote would support it. A majority wouldn't, but 40% would. And about 80 to 90%, I'm being told, consistently, of Labor members allowed a conscience vote would support it. Now, if you do the math of this Parliament, it's pretty obvious that that's a huge majority in favour of a piece of very important legislation. The fact that it's brought forward by an independent and the Parliament does its job as a forum for debate and legislation goes through and it's all done on conscience, might be an advantage to the political parties who do not want to antagonise the Christian lobby.
In what way?
It wouldn't be their initiative. It wouldn't be a piece of Liberal or a piece of Labor legislation. They can shift the blame onto me, which is what they do anyway. And I'm very happy for that to occur if we get a result. Because the Christian lobby know that I'm not going to give up in this human rights contest, and have, obviously put an enormous amount of pressure on me through all sorts of mechanisms. They put the pressure on me through the political parties, they put the pressure on me through their own Christian lobby, and they put the pressure on me through the media. I, however, am going to proceed with this so that the political parties have the opportunity to do the right thing in this state and support a piece of fair human rights legislation that just makes people respected, legitimate and equal.
And treated in every way the same as everybody else.
And treated the same as everybody else.
And we'll be back with more from Mr. Olexander on his bill later in the show.
So what would be the benefits for the GLBTI community? Would we superannuation
Yeah.
entitlements and...
It would be virtually, if this bill were to be passed, there'd be 47 pieces of other Victorian legislation that would also change automatically to recognise civil unions couples, whether they were men and women, or whether they were women and women, or whether they were men and men, or intersex people, or any combination of those. They would be recognised in the same way as marriages under Victorian law. So inheritance, property, issues like superannuation, issues like recognition by various government authorities of the partnerships, even things like the Evidence Act, where a married partner of somebody else is not required to give evidence against that person in a court of law, would change.
Yep.
So that people in a civil union would have that same right, not to have to give evidence against their civil union partner in a court of law. And there are a whole range of other rights and obligations about partnerships and businesses and things like that that married couples have, and tax arrangements as well, which do not accrue currently to same-sex people or intersex people.
So,
and they'd get those rights through this bill.
So what's next for the bill? Where are you up to now?
I will be taking the bill to Parliament in September, and I will be seeking leave of the Parliament to put it on the notice paper on the agenda for debate, and to make it the first item for debate.
So when you say seeking leave, what does that mean?
Well, the rules of the Parliament are pretty archaic, and one of the rules of the upper house is that if you want to get something onto the parliamentary agenda, you have to have the leave of the House to do it. Now that means that any individual member of the Parliament can deny leave. And if one member of the House says no, leave not granted, leave is not granted. It doesn't have to go under those circumstances to a vote or a majority vote. If the bill doesn't go through in this session of Parliament, and there's plenty of time to do it, if the bill doesn't go through, there will be I believe a large number of civil unions candidates who will run at the state election and who could determine the result of seats, particularly close seats, with their preferences. And possibly even one or two of those candidates could get elected, depending on the strength of their campaign and how many members of the general community said, we'll use our vote to send a message to the government that we disagree with this bill being squashed, with this bill being stopped and guillotined.
Okay. One of the things was 16 and 17-year-olds are allowed to enter into a civil union.
Yes.
But
the rules for a civil union are identical to the rules for marriage. So if a 16 or 17-year-old wants to get married, they need to have the consent of their legal guardian or parent. And if they don't have the consent of the legal guardian or parent, they can apply to a court for the court to make a determination as to whether it's appropriate and in their best interest for them to get married, and the court can provide that permission. And it's exactly the same here for civil unions. I don't see why a civil union couple, whether they're same sex or opposite sex, should be treated differently from a married couple. So 16 and 17-year-olds should be able to make those decisions with parental consent and get married, and they should be able to do the same thing and have a civil union.
with a civil union celebrant, can a marriage celebrant be a civil union celebrant?
Yes.
Or they can't?
Yeah, the short answer is a marriage celebrant can be, but they are not automatically a civil union celebrant.
Okay.
The person who registers and empowers and administers the celebrants would be the registrar of births, deaths and marriages in Victoria. It's a department. And that registrar would prescribe qualifications and appropriate people, and there's a bit about it in the bill who's appropriate and not, and they'd have to apply and probably pay a fee and maybe undergo some training to become a civil union celebrant.
Ted Baillie's comments that he, what does he say? He supports in principle a civil union but not a marriage. What do you say to that?
Well, I say that it's one thing to say that in principle, in some vague way, I think a civil union's a good thing. It's another thing to actually do something about it. Now, I know from my knowledge of the Liberal Party organisation and the Liberal Party in Parliament, the party room of the party, that the majority of Ted's party room that he leads would not wear civil unions legislation and would not support it. A lot of people don't understand that in order for him to do anything about it, he would have to get the support of his party room. 60, possibly even 70% of his party room would not support such a proposal. Given the federal government's position, which is a Liberal government, and their support for that, it would be extremely difficult for Ted Baillie to get that through and actually do anything to support, in a practical way, civil unions. I think the situation is quite different with the Bracks government. I think that most of the Bracks government MPs would support it, but the Premier is saying that he won't let it go on the agenda because
so
he doesn't
got
want
the opportunity to support it even if they could.
That's right. It's because he doesn't want to antagonise the elements in the right and the extreme religious elements as well. He doesn't want to rock the boat. So you've got the weird position that the leader of the Liberal Party says he supports them, but his party won't, and the leader of the Labor Party, the government, says he won't support them, but his party does.
Party will. Yeah.
Just allow a debate to take place. That's what a democracy is all about. Let me move the bill. Let the people in the Parliament who are elected by the people, not the parties, the political parties haven't elected them, the voters have, and let them make their own decision on the basis of their conscience. And I guarantee that this bill would be passed and we would have those equal rights with married couples. If that doesn't happen, we're just going to have to continue the campaign in the coming months and years post this election to make sure that it does happen.
Well, civil unions are definitely on the agenda, and it's going to be a very interesting time to see where they go from here. I'd like to thank Andrew for his time, and we'll see you next time on Q Focus.